The grand chamber of the High Synod was not built for silence, yet silence was the only tyrant that ruled it now. The architecture itself was designed to amplify the voice of authority, a vast, cavernous hollow carved from the heart of a hollowed-out moon, lined with the obsidian acoustical plating that the Zaltora had perfected over 1,000 cycles of conquest. Usually this space thundered with the roar of decrees, the stamping of armored boots, and the rhythmic chanting of the war priests blessing the fleet. Today, however, the air was stagnant, thick with the pheromones of anxiety and the metallic tang of recycled oxygen that tasted of fear. The holographic projection in the center of the room, a swirling sphere of data and tactical readouts, bathed the faces of the council in a ghostly, pale blue light. It was the only source of illumination, casting long, distorted shadows that danced against the high walls like the specters of civilizations the Zaltora had extinguished. High Exarch Vox stood at the precipice of the command dais, his 4 manipulator arms clenched behind his back, his primary eyes narrowed into slits of frustration. He was a creature of immense physical power, his chitinous armor scarred from the border wars of the Rim, but here, in the cold vacuum of political command, his physical strength meant nothing. The readout before him refused to change. It was a single, flat line of data where there should have been a crescendo of violence. "Explain this," Vox rumbled, his voice vibrating deep in his thorax, a sound that usually commanded immediate obedience. "The Gorgon is the apex of our naval engineering. It is the world ender. It is the despair of nations. Why does the telemetry show 0 energy output? Why is the main cannon cold?" Loremaster Thraxus, a spindly, elderly Zaltora whose carapace had grayed with the molts of centuries, stepped forward hesitantly. He clutched a data slate as if it were a shield, his sensory antennae twitching with nervous energy. "High Exarch, the data is contradictory. The Gorgon has not malfunctioned. The reactor core is active. The biological neural links are intact. The ship is alive. It is simply refusing." Refusing? The word hung in the air, alien and impossible. Zaltora bioships did not refuse. They were bred in the spawning pools of the capital world, their minds lobotomized and shackled to the will of their commanders, designed to feel only the hunger for destruction and the obedience of the pack. "A ship does not have the capacity to refuse, Thraxus. It has the capacity to kill. That is all." "The telemetry indicates a breach," Thraxus whispered, his voice trembling as he gestured to a small, blinking red dot on the massive holographic map of the contested sector. "A single breach. A Terran shuttle, sublight, unarmed, bypassed the perimeter defenses. It did not use stealth technology. It simply flew in. The automated turrets did not track it. The point defense biocannons did not engage. It docked with the Gorgon at the primary airlock." Vox turned slowly, the heavy plates of his armor grinding together. The other members of the Synod, representatives of the merchant guilds, the priestly caste, and the colonial overseers, leaned in, their mandibles clicking in hushed agitation. The Terrans, the newcomers, the soft-skinned, bipedal anomaly that had appeared on the galactic fringe only 40 cycles ago. They were an enigma. They did not expand aggressively, yet their borders were impregnable. They did not boast of their weapons, yet their trade fleets moved unmolested through pirate space. The Zaltora had decided that the Terrans were weak, a species of diplomats and merchants who lacked the stomach for the crucible of war. That was why the Gorgon had been sent. It was meant to be a demonstration. A single shot from its singularity projector would have cracked the crust of the Terran colony world of Aurum, ending the war before it began. "One shuttle," Vox hissed. "And how many boarders, a strike team, a legion of their cybernetic shock troops?" Thraxus swallowed hard, a wet clicking sound. "One, High Exarch. The biosensors detect a single life form, a human." The silence returned, heavier than before. It was the silence of confusion, the cognitive dissonance of a warrior culture facing something that defied the logic of warfare. One human had boarded the deadliest ship in the galaxy, a vessel the size of a city, teeming with 10,000 Zaltora warriors and the biomechanical horrors of the lower decks. And upon this boarding, the ship had stopped. It hadn't exploded. It hadn't fired on itself. It had simply ceased to be a weapon. "Then the war has begun," Vox declared, his voice rising to a shout. "They mock us. They believe they can disable our flagship with a single agent and we will bow. This is not diplomacy. This is an insult of the highest order. If the Gorgon will not fire, then the fleet will. Order the second and third arm. Ada's to jump to the Aurum sector. If the humans want to play games with their ghosts, we will burn the board with nuclear fire." "Wait," Matriarch Lyra spoke from the shadows of the dais. Her voice was like spun silk, soft but tensile. She was the head of the psionic diplomatic corps, a caste rarely listened to in times of mobilization but feared for their insight. Look at the readings, Vok, not the energy output, the emotional resonance. The Gorgon is a bioship. It has a rudimentary soul, a subconsciousness required to manage the singularity drive. Look at the resonance levels. Vok glared at the display. He did not understand the squiggly lines of the psionic charts, but he saw the color. Usually, a combat-ready bioship projected a jagged red aura of aggression and pain, the stimulants pumped into its veins to keep it enraged. The Gorgon's readout was not red. It was a steady, rhythmic pulse of deep blue. "What does it mean?" Vok demanded. "It means," Lyra said, her own eyes widening in a rare show of shock, "that the ship is calm. For the first time since it was spawned, the Gorgon is at peace. The human did not board to sabotage the guns, High Exarch. He boarded to speak to the beast." Millions of kilometers away, in the cold void between the stars, the Gorgon hung motionless against the backdrop of the nebula. It was a monstrosity of engineering, a fusion of black metal and gray, pulsating flesh. Veins the size of transit tunnels pulsed along its hull, pumping nutrient fluids to the massive weapon mounts. It was ugly, efficient, and terrifying. Inside, the atmosphere was chaotic. Commander Kalen paced the bridge, his sidearm drawn, his mandibles flaring in a display of dominance that he did not truly feel. The bridge crew was in a panic. The helm controls were locked. The weapons systems were offline. But they weren't broken. They were simply unresponsive, as if the ship had decided to ignore them. "Report," Kalen barked, pointing his weapon at the sensor officer. "Where is the intruder? Why have the internal security systems not liquidated him?" I cannot track him, Commander," the officer squealed, his claws clattering over the organic interface console. "The ship's internal sensors register him as friend, as self. The blast doors are opening for him automatically. The internal hunter drones are ignoring him. He is moving toward the central neural cortex." Kalen felt a chill run through his blood. The neural cortex was the brain of the ship, the place where the biological mind of the vessel was shackled to the computer interface. It was a place of madness, filled with the psychic screams of the enslaved Leviathan. No Zaltora could enter that chamber without heavy psionic shielding, lest they be driven insane by the ship's projected pain. "He goes to the brain," Kalen whispered. "He intends to lobotomize the ship manually. Squad Alpha with me. We intercept him at the threshold, kill on sight. No warnings. This human has bewitched the machine spirit, but he cannot bewitch lead." Kalen rallied his elite guard, 6 massive warriors clad in void armor, and stormed off the bridge. The corridors of the Gorgon were dark, illuminated only by the bioluminescent pulsing of the walls. The ship felt different. Usually the floor plates vibrated with a low-frequency growl, a constant reminder of the ship's hunger. Now the vibrations were soothing, a rhythmic thrum like a heartbeat in deep sleep. The air smelled less of ozone and more of rain. It was impossible, yet the scent was there. They reached the heavy blast doors of the neural cortex. They were open. Kalen signaled his squad to advance. They moved with military precision, weapons raised, stepping into the vast, spherical chamber that housed the ship's mind. The room was a nightmare of biology. Massive synaptic cables hung from the ceiling like vines in a jungle, dripping with conductive fluids. In the center, suspended in a tank of amber liquid, was the brain, a massive, pulsating organ the size of a shuttle, wired with thousands of electrodes that shocked it into obedience. Usually the tank roiled with bubbles, the brain trashing in its eternal agony. Today the tank was still. Standing before the glass, looking up at the massive organ, was the human. He was small, unimposing compared to the hulking Zaltora warriors. He wore a simple white pressure suit, unarmored with no visible weapons. His helmet was removed, held loosely in one hand, revealing a face that was pale, lined with age, and topped with thinning gray hair. He looked like a scholar or perhaps a grandfather, not a soldier. He did not turn as the squad burst in. He did not flinch as 7 plasma rifles leveled at his back. "Step away from the tank," Kalen roared, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Turn and kneel, Terran, or you will be vaporized." The human slowly raised a hand. He did not turn. He simply placed his palm against the thick glass of the tank. "Quiet, please," the human said. His voice was soft, yet it carried through the room with unnatural clarity. "We are having a conversation." "You are speaking to a piece of meat," Kalen shouted, his finger tightening on the trigger. "It is a weapon. It has no mind for words." "That is where you are wrong, Commander," the human said, finally turning. His eyes were dark, filled with a sadness so profound that Kalen felt momentarily stunned. Everything has a mind if you know how to listen. You call this ship the Gorgon. You built it to devour worlds, but it has a name. It remembers the spawning pools. It remembers the song of the nebula where you harvested its genetic template. It has been screaming for 200 years, Commander. And you have only ever answered with electric shocks. Shoot him, Kalen ordered, the fear taking over. Fire. The squad squeezed their triggers. The plasma rifles whined, discharging bolts of superheated energy. But the bolts never reached the human. In the air between the squad and the man, the air rippled. A barrier of pure kinetic force, generated not by a shield generator, but by the ship's own internal gravity plating, manifested instantly. The plasma splashed harmlessly against the invisible wall, dissipating into heat. The human looked at them with pity. She won't let you hurt me, not anymore. I'm the first person who asked her where it hurt. Kalen stared, his mind reeling. The ship was protecting him. The loyalty conditioning was absolute. It was genetic. It was impossible to break. Unless the conditioning wasn't broken but superseded. Who are you? Kalen whispered, lowering his weapon slightly as he realized the futility of firing again. What are you? My name is Elian Vance, the man said, turning back to the tank. He rested his forehead against the glass. I am a harmonic engineer from the Terran Federation, and I am here to accept your surrender. Surrender? Kalen laughed, a harsh barking sound. You are one man on a ship of 10,000. You are trapped. The High Synod has likely already declared war. My fleet will be here within the hour. Even if you control the ship, you cannot fight an armada. We do not intend to fight, Vance said. And the war you speak of, yes, it has begun, but not the war you think. You believe the universe is a hierarchy of predators, Commander. You believe the strong eat the weak. The Zaltora built an empire on that truth. You underestimated humanity because we did not build dreadnoughts like this. You saw our ships modular, defensive, exploration-focused, and you thought us prey. Vance tapped the glass. Inside the tank, the massive brain pulsed a soft, golden light. We didn't build dreadnoughts because we found something better, Vance continued. We discovered the underlying frequency of consciousness. We found that the universe is not a hunting ground, but a choir. When we encounter a species like yours, one that enslaves the living universe to make weapons, we don't send soldiers to break the weapons. We send engineers to wake them up. The ship suddenly lurched. It wasn't the violent jerk of an engine start, but a smooth, powerful shift in orientation. What is happening? Kalen demanded, grabbing a support strut. She is turning, Vance said. The fleet you mentioned, the second and third armadas, they are arriving now, aren't they? Kalen checked his wrist display. Multiple slip-space ruptures were opening in the sector. The Zaltora fleet had arrived. Hundreds of warships, destroyers, and carriers, all weapons hot, surrounding the Gorgon. They will destroy us, Kalen said, a cold realization washing over him. The High Exarch would rather vaporize the flagship than let it fall into enemy hands. You have killed us all, human. Watch, Vance said. Back in the High Synod, pandemonium reigned. The tactical display showed the arrival of the massive Zaltora fleet surrounding the silent Gorgon. High Exarch Vok was shouting orders into the comms channel. Target the bridge and the reactor core, full spread of torpedoes, vaporize it, do not hesitate. The fleet obeyed. Hundreds of fusion torpedoes streaked from the launch tubes of the destroyers, a swarm of fire converging on the lone dreadnought. It was enough firepower to turn a moon into dust. It is done, Thraxis whispered, closing his eyes. A tragic loss of resources. Necessary, Vok growled. The Terran infection must be cauterized. On the screen, the missiles closed the distance. 5 seconds to impact, 4, 3. Then the Gorgon sang. It was not a sound audible to the ears, for sound does not travel in a vacuum. It was a psionic wave, a telepathic broadcast so powerful it overloaded the sensory arrays of every ship in the fleet. In the high chamber, the council members clutched their heads, falling to their knees as a sound like a great, harmonious bell rang in their minds. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. On the tactical display, the impossible happened. The torpedoes did not detonate. As they entered the immediate gravity well of the Gorgon, they simply stopped. Their propulsion drives flared and died. Their warheads deactivated. They drifted like harmless debris, caught in a gentle orbit around the massive ship. Report, Vok screamed, fighting through the headache. Why did the warheads fail? Did they use an EMP? No EMP, the sensor officer gasped, bleeding from his nasal slits. The uranium, the fusion triggers, they have been stabilized. Stabilized. The atomic structure of the explosive material has been altered. The ship projected a field of order. It imposed a stasis on the nuclear reaction. High Exarch, the Gorgon is manipulating the fundamental laws of physics in its immediate vicinity. It is not fighting. It is denying the violence. In the neural cortex, Elian Vance watched the display with a calm expression. Kalen was on the floor, staring up at the human with terror and awe. How, Kalen rasped. When you torture a living thing, Vance explained, it withdraws, it limits itself to survival. The Gorgon has incredible power, but she was using all of it to endure your abuse. Now that she is free of pain, now that she feels safe, she can stretch her legs. Your physics is based on force. Ours is based on resonance. We taught her how to harmonize with the reality around her. She didn't stop the missiles by hitting them. She convinced them that exploding was the wrong thing to do. Vance knelt beside the alien commander. This is the war we wage, Commander. We don't conquer your planets. We don't burn your fleets. We dismantle the very philosophy of your existence. You use fear. We use understanding. And understanding is a far more potent weapon, because once you understand your enemy, you can no longer hate him. Kalen looked at the screen. The Zaltora fleet was in disarray. The massive warships were drifting, their crews likely incapacitated by the psionic song. The Gorgon began to move, not away from the fleet, but through it. As it passed the other bioships, smaller cousins, cruisers and destroyers bred from the same genetic stock, something miraculous occurred. The other ships began to turn. Their weapon ports closed. Their navigation lights shifted from the angry red of the Zaltora military to the calm blue of the Gorgon. They are listening to her, Vance murmured. She is telling them that they don't have to be afraid anymore. She is the alpha now, not by dominance but by liberation. The weeks that followed were a chaotic blur that reshaped the history of the galaxy. The Battle of the Silent Ship was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was a mass defection. The Gorgon, led by Elian Vance and a bewildered but slowly converting Commander Kalen, moved through the Zaltora frontier. Everywhere it went, it sang. And everywhere it sang, the Zaltora biomachinery woke up. Fortress worlds found their living defense grids refusing to fire. Patrol fleets turned around and escorted the Gorgon instead of attacking it. The Zaltora High Synod collapsed not because of an invasion, but because their tools of oppression simply stopped working. The economy, built on the breeding and enslavement of biotech, ground to a halt. Humanity's true fleet finally revealed itself. They did not arrive in warships. They arrived in massive white hospital ships and diplomatic cruisers. They brought food, they brought engineers, and they brought teachers. They did not occupy Zaltora worlds. They landed and offered to help transition the society from one of conquest to one of cooperation. They treated the terrified Zaltora civilians with respect, dismantling the propaganda that humans were monsters. But the true climax, the true reason for the human intervention, was yet to be revealed. 6 months after the incident, Elian Vance stood once again on the bridge of the Gorgon. The ship had been refitted. The dark, oppressive corridors were now bright and filled with plants from Terra and Zaltora Prime. The crew was mixed, humans working alongside Zaltora, learning to pilot the ship through partnership rather than pain. Commander Kalen, now stripped of his rank of commander, and simply known as Ship Speaker Kalen, stood beside Vance. The High Synod has formally dissolved, Kalen said, looking out at the stars. A provisional government is forming. They are asking for Federation guidance, but there is something you have not told us, Elian. Oh, Vance asked, looking up from a datapad. You did not come here just to save us from ourselves, Kalen said, his compound eyes fixing on the human. The resources required for this operation, the risk you took boarding the Gorgon, it was too high for simple altruism. The Federation is kind, yes, but it is also logical. You needed the Gorgon. You needed the Zaltora biofleet. Why? Vance sighed, the weight of the galaxy seeming Oh, settle on his shoulders. He gestured to the main view screen. Show him ship. The stars on the screen shifted. The view zoomed out, leaving the galaxy behind, focusing on the deep, empty void of intergalactic space. At first, it looked empty. But then, the sensors, boosted by the Gorgon's awakened sensitivity, began to pick up shadows. Massive shapes, billions of them, blocking out the light of distant galaxies. We call them the entropy swarm, Vance said quietly. They are not ships. They are not biological in a way we understand. They are negation. They consume energy, stars, planets, life. They have stripped 3 galaxies bare before they turned toward ours. We detected them 50 years ago. Kalen stared at the horror on the screen. The scale was unimaginable. The Zaltora Empire, for all its might, would be a mote of dust against this storm. Metal ships cannot fight them, Vance continued. Their technology dampens electron flow, conventional circuits die in their presence, AI goes silent, fusion drives fail. The Federation realized that our technology, advanced as it was useless against the swarm. We needed something else. We needed ships that didn't run on electricity alone. We needed ships that had souls, ships that could feel, adapt, and reject the entropy. Vance looked at Kalen. We saw your empire, we saw your bioships. You were abusing the very weapon that could save this galaxy. You were torturing the only guardians capable of standing against the dark. We didn't conquer you, Kalen, because we needed you. We need the Zaltora. We need your pilots, your warriors, and most of all, your ships. But we needed them to be awake. A slave fights only until the whip is gone. A partner fights for its home. Kalen looked at the screen, then down at his own hands, claws that had once only known how to tear, now learning to build. He looked at the Gorgon, sensing the massive, warm presence of the ship in his mind. She was afraid of the shadows in the void, yes, but she was also fierce. She was ready to protect the life that had finally shown her kindness. The war began, Kalen whispered, realizing the true meaning of the human's words months ago. The war for the galaxy. Yes, Vance said, extending a hand. The Zaltora and humanity, the biofleets and the harmonic engineers. It will be the greatest alliance the stars have ever seen. But we have work to do. The swarm will be here in 10 cycles. We have to wake up the rest of your fleet. Kalen took the human's hand. The grip was firm. Then let us begin, Kalen said. The Gorgon is ready to sing. The ship turned, its engines flaring with a brilliant, harmonious blue light, no longer a monster of the dark, but a torchbearer leading a unified fleet into the unknown. The silence of the chamber was gone, replaced by the hum of a billion minds working in unison, a sound far louder than any cannon echoing defiance into the infinite night. High Exarch Vox sat in his cell, a comfortable room with a view of the reconstruction of the capital. He was no longer a leader, but a prisoner of his own obsolescence. He watched the news feeds. He saw humans and Zaltora working together to heal the scarred hulls of the old dreadnoughts. He saw the children of his race playing with human children, their laughter transcending the barrier of species. He picked up a data slate containing the manifesto of the new alliance. It spoke of the swarm. It spoke of the necessity of unity. And for the first time in his life, the old warrior felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was hope. He looked at the sky, where the Gorgon was breaking orbit, leading a procession of thousands of ships toward the galactic rim. They looked beautiful. Perhaps, Vox muttered to the empty room, we were never the masters, we were merely the cocoon. He placed the slate down and walked to the window. The universe was vast, terrifying, and filled with monsters. But as he watched the blue engines streak across the sky, he knew one thing for certain. The monsters didn't stand a chance. The atmosphere in the Provisional Council chambers on Zaltora Prime was radically different from the cold obsidian hall of the old Synod. The humans had introduced a modular, circular seating arrangement, fostering eye contact and equality. Light streamed in from open skylights, and the air smelled of fresh vegetation. Elian Vance sat quietly, his work mostly done, observing the new generation of leaders. Matriarch Lyra was there, her role expanded from a niche advisor to the head of the Interspecies Relations Council. She was speaking with a human admiral, a woman named Chen, whose fleet of logistics vessels was currently overhauling the orbital shipyards. The integration of the neural links is proceeding faster than anticipated, Lyra was saying, her antennae waving in excitement. It appears that the bioships prefer the human interface protocols. Your minds, they are less rigid. You allow the ships to drift, to dream, whereas we force them into a singular track of focus. The efficiency rating of the Third Fleet has increased by 400% since we adopted the harmonic doctrine. Admiral Chen nodded, tapping her stylus on the table. That's good, Lyra, but we need to talk about the deep-range sensors. The Gorgon's awakening triggered a chain reaction in the subsonic subspace network. We're picking up echoes from the outer rim. The swarm isn't just drifting, they're reacting to the awakening. They can hear the ships singing. The room went quiet. The romantic phase of the revolution was over. The reality of the existential threat was setting in. Let them hear us, came a deep, resonant voice. Kalen entered the room. He wore a new uniform, a blend of Zaltora plating and Terran fabric, bearing the insignia of the United Galactic Defense. He looked tired, but his posture was upright, devoid of the submissive hunch he used to adopt before the exarchs. "We spent centuries hiding in the dark, biting at anything that came near us because we were afraid," Kalen said, walking to the center of the room. "We made ourselves silent so the universe wouldn't notice us. That is over. If the swarm is coming, let them come to a galaxy that is awake. Let them come to a galaxy that is loud." He turned to Vance. "Elian, the Gorgon has detected a vanguard unit of the swarm, a scout element. They are entering the Helios system. It is an uninhabited system, but it is rich in solar energy. If they feed there, they will grow enough to spawn a localized hive." Vance stood up, size of the hostile force. 3 world eaters and 1,000,000 drones. A gasp went through the room. A single world eater was a theoretical threat the Zaltora had only heard of in legends from dead civilizations. To have 3 on the doorstep was a nightmare. "We are not ready," Admiral Chen said, her face pale. "The refits are only 30% complete. The crews are still training. We can't coordinate a fleet battle of that magnitude." "We don't need a fleet battle," Vance said, his eyes locking with Kalen S. "We have the Gorgon, and we have the Sovereign's Wrath, the Void Stalker, and the Starbreaker, the 4 great elders." "They are just 4 ships," Lyra argued, "against 1,000,000 drones." "They are not just ships," Kalen corrected her. "They are the choir." The Helios system was a blinding place, dominated by a blue giant star that poured radiation into the void. Entering the system, the swarm looked like a stain of ink on a pristine painting. The world eaters were amorphous blobs of darkness, absorbing the light, casting shadows that defied the angles of the sun. They moved with a terrifying silence, stripping asteroids of their minerals and sucking the solar wind into their maws. Suddenly, space ruptured. Not the violent tear of a warp drive, but the smooth, fluid opening of a harmonic gateway. 4 ships emerged. The Gorgon took point, flanked by 3 other Leviathans of the Zaltora ancient fleet. They had been washed of their war paint. Their hulls shone with a bioluminescent sheen, shifting colors like cuttlefish. Inside the Gorgon, Elian Vance sat in the command chair, not a throne, but a pilot's linkage. He wore a headset that connected him directly to the ship's emotional core. Beside him, Kalen manned the tactical station, his mind linked to the gunnery organs. "They see us," Kalen reported. "The drones are breaking formation. They are swarming." The view screen turned black as 1,000,000 tiny void creatures, each the size of a fighter jet, blocked out the stars. They were mindless, driven only by hunger, a tidal wave of entropy. "Steady," Vance whispered to the ship. "I know you're scared, but you are the queen here. This is your garden." The ship shuddered, a ripple of fear passing through the deck plates. "Trust me," Vance projected. "Sing." "Initiate the harmonic resonance," Vance ordered aloud. "Frequency Alpha Omicron, the song of creation." The 4 dreadnoughts opened their communication arrays. They opened their weapon ports, but instead of missiles, they released canisters of ionized gas, vast clouds of particulates. Then they pulsed. Gravity waves, modulated into a specific frequency, slammed into the gas clouds. The gas ignited, not with fire, but with light. The entire sector was bathed in a blinding, strobing rhythm of colors. To a biological mind, it was beautiful. To the swarm, which existed to consume energy and enforce darkness, it was agony. The chaotic frequency of the light disrupted the hive-mind connection of the drones. They began to crash into each other. They spun out of control. "The world eaters are advancing," Kalen warned. "They are shielding themselves against the light. They are preparing to fire antimatter streams." "Let them get close," Vance said. "Wait for it." The massive blobs of darkness loomed over the Gorgon. They were large enough "Oh, swallow the dreadnought whole." "Now," Vance shouted, "link minds, total unity." On the bridge, the human crew and the Zaltora crew did the unthinkable. They dropped their mental shields. They allowed the ship to bridge their minds together. For a moment, there was no Elian, no Kalen, no Admiral Chen. There was only us. The combined psychic weight of 10,000 sentients, amplified by the bioship's neural core, was projected outward in a spear of pure thought. It wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of imposition. The Gorgon shouted into the void. It shouted, "I exist." The sheer density of that reality-asserting thought hit the world eaters. These creatures of entropy relied on the universe being passive, on matter surrendering to the void. They could not process a denial of their nature so potent. The lead world eater shuddered, its form destabilized. It tried to digest the psychic energy, but the energy was too structured, too alive. It was like trying to digest a diamond. The world eater imploded. It collapsed in on itself, unable to maintain its cohesion against the wave of life force emanating from the fleet. It flashed out of existence, leaving behind a shockwave of exotic particles. The other two entities paused. For the first time in eons, the swarm felt hesitation. "Push them," Kalen roared, his mind soaring on the wings of the ship. "Get out of our stars." The four ships advanced, the psychic scream intensifying. The remaining world eaters turned. They fled. They warped out of the system, retreating back into the deep dark. The drones, severed from their masters, went dormant, drifting lifelessly. On the bridge of the Gorgon, the link severed. Men and aliens slumped over their consoles, exhausted, gasping for air. Elian Vance wiped blood from his nose. Silence returned to the bridge, but it was a warm silence. A silence of victory. Kalen looked at Vance. The alien's face was unreadable, but his aura was shining. "We made them run," Kalen whispered. "We made the darkness run." "This was just the scout party," Vance reminded him, his voice raspy. "But now they know, this galaxy isn't a buffet, it's a fortress." The Gorgon let out a low, contented thrum, vibrating through the boots of everyone on board. It felt proud. 3 years later, the galaxy had changed. The border between Terran space and the Zaltora sovereignty had been erased. In its place was the United Systems Alliance. The great bioships of the Zaltora were now common sights in human ports, and human engineers were revered figures in Zaltora society. Elian Vance sat on a balcony overlooking the sparkling oceans of Aurum, the planet that was almost destroyed by the Gorgon years ago. He was retired now. The war against the swarm was ongoing, a slow grind at the galactic rim, but the Alliance was holding. Every day, more species joined. The message had spread. There is a way to fight the dark. A shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Kalen, looking regal in his diplomatic robes. "The ship misses you," Kalen said, sitting down beside him. "She asks for you often." "She has a new conductor now," Vance smiled. "Young specialized telepaths, they have more energy than I do." "But they do not have your sadness," Kalen said profoundly. "It was your sadness that she connected with, Elian. You understood her pain because you carried your own. That is the strength of humanity. You transmute suffering into empathy." Vance looked at the sunset. "How goes the front?" "We held the Perseus arm. The Gorgon led the charge. We lost the Starbreaker." Vance bowed his head. "I'm sorry." "She died singing," Kalen said softly. "She took a dozen world eaters with her. It was a good death, a warrior's death, but also a choice. She chose to save the evacuation fleet." They sat in silence for a long time. Two veterans of a war that started with a single step onto a dangerous ship. "You know," Vance said, "when I boarded her that day, I didn't think I'd survive the first 5 minutes. I didn't have a plan. I just knew that I couldn't let the war start." "But the war did start, Elian," Kalen corrected him, gesturing to the stars appearing in the twilight sky. "Just not the one we expected, and thank the great void for that." Vance nodded. He looked at the stars, knowing that out there in the cold, the great living ships were standing guard, their engines burning blue, their minds linked in a chorus of defiance. "Yeah," Vance whispered. "Humanity, fuck yeah." Kalen tilted his head. "I still do not understand that phrase. It seems grammatically inefficient." Vance laughed, a sound that carried over the waves. "You'll get it eventually, old friend. You'll get it eventually." The camera pulled back, rising higher and higher, leaving the balcony, leaving the planet, drifting past the orbiting shipyards where humans and aliens welded side by side, past the patrol fleets, out into the vast, beautiful, terrifying expanse of the galaxy, a galaxy that was no longer silent, a galaxy that had learned to sing. And in the dark, the monsters listened, and for the first time they knew fear.